Hi there, I'm Jack Kellum, also known as Jack Gogsbane on Twitter, a few other places. I drink coffee and I know things. Welcome back to Of Gods and Game Masters and my world building series, starting from the Pantheon of Gods, with gods filing off the serial numbers, and moving through the ages, from the struggle of creation to the start of the game. Last episode was Races of Rega, Mortals and Men. It was supposed to cover all the bases and all the races, but it got a little long. So we have the full spectrum left to cover, from the metallic-skinned Spartoi to the twisted Koboloi. If you want to support what I do, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. My Patreon and other links are in the description. I could really use your support. Also, there are links to the reference sheet for the gods to help you keep up. I would like to draw attention to the fact that the full Pantheon has now been released on my web store, Ko-Fi, Itch, and DriveThru, links likewise in the description. Go get it to see how the gods developed from their original ideas, because they definitely took on a life of their own. You could also buy my compendium of witty bardic spells for Rega and other settings, Spells of Eloquence. Pick up my setting-agnostic town format for building settlements, which I used in my work in progress, Marshcliff, coming soon, for free. You can get the format I use for gods, also for free, or buy my supplement about animals who became blood-sucking monsters to avenge themselves on two-legged creatures, the Beastkin vampires. Super important, though. In August, I'm running 2 actual plays, one of which is set in the successor states. So you'll get to see this world in action. The other one's a GURPS horror game set in Arizona in the 1880s, so a bit of a tonal shift. Anyway, when it comes to the species of Rega, once again, it all comes back to the gods, as you might expect. We discussed that a bit in Gods filing off the serial numbers. Some of it's clarified in the final descriptions and myths in Gods of Rega. But we're going to be a bit more clear here and explain my reasoning as we go. Again. We covered humans and elves and dwarves and halflings with their sub-races, which are more like ethnicities and cultures, many of which exist due to ongoing interbreeding between the species. Yes, I know that species is defined by the ability to interbreed or not, but even in real science, that's super flexible. As a reminder, the main ethnicity of Rega, the human one, is a mixed one in origin, but now it's a distinct ethnicity. A mixture of what in our world we would term African, Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian, and Mediterranean ethnicities, giving us a deep brown people with variable features and anime hair and eyes, due to also breeding with gods, celestials, dwarves, elves, and halflings. This occurred due to a 3,000-year egalitarian and cosmopolitan empire, following the rules of real gods, who made very clear that they required their followers to avoid shallow bigotry. So, today we're going to cover one of the more rare races of Rega, the Spartoi, who kind of filled a big, strong, warlike race archetype. The Koboloi, or Goblin folk, twisted by the blood of Invidia, but not always evil by any means. The plain-touched races and how they fit in this world. And then probably the Dragonkin, dragons, dragonborn, and kobolds. So it's gonna be another long one. First, the Spartoi. They were made last of the sapient races as a response to the existence of the chromatic dragons and their spawn, and the threat that posed to the mortal races. They were crafted quite literally from the teeth of the metallic dragons by Ignia, just as she and her father made the metallic dragons to counter the chromatic threat. There are 5 ethnicities of Spartoi, one for each of the major metallic kinds. Unlike most worlds, there seems to be a bit more prestige actually attached to being bronze than gold, by the way, because the bronze are more closely associated with Savios, even though they're slightly less powerful than gold, usually. All of the Spartoi are larger than humans, upwards of 6.5 feet and upwards of 260 pounds. They resemble physically perfect human specimens, almost always, like statues made of the metal that their draconic forebear embodied. So, starting from the Bronze Tooth, we have literally bronze-skinned, beautiful humanoids, often very well muscled, but in the soft Greco-Roman ideal of musculature. They live, except when doing their gods-given duties of protecting mortal settlements from the servants of Invidia and the Dark Three, which they're free to ignore, but few choose to, on or near the coasts, and breathe both air and water. They, like other Spartoi, have large powerful builds, are resistant to dragon breath and dragon fear, and likewise resistant to the element their forebears breathe as a weapon. They all are as resistant to being put out of the fight as half-orcs are in other worlds. Bronzetooths tend to be fierce and wild, like the storms and seas they love. The Silvertooth, who live in high hills and mountains, are a bulwark against the Reds and their spawn, most specifically, as well as against the White Dragons of the North. They're known for their capabilities of command. Their subrace has the ability of forceful presence. They're often more beautiful even than other Spartoi, with shining silver skin and silver blue eyes. They're known for dignity, grace, and compassion, most favored by Kaela and Lunos. The Coppertooth, like their draconic forebears, are quirky and full of humor. If Vulpos favors some of the Spartoi, it's these. They live in the low rolling hills that border the mountains, and in the green forests, often living close by hill dwarves, lightfoot and stout halflings, or the wood and high elves. Their subtype's unique ability allows them to root themselves to the earth and be very hard to move indeed. The Brasstooth are found in the arid desert lands and high steppes, but also the rolling plains. They're perhaps the most common of the Spartoi. They're friendly, talkative, and as peaceful as they can manage, but do not mistake peacefulness for harmlessness or weakness. They move faster across the plains and desert than other folks and can go longer without water. The Goldtooth are exceedingly rare, and many folk of Rega go their whole life without meeting one. But they're said to be among the greatest of their kind, with both magic and might beyond their kin. They have no fixed favorite environment, and seem to seclude themselves from others most of the time, for reasons they've not yet divulged. Rumor says they have the abilities of all the other types. The Spartoi, as a whole, have a god's-given duty of protecting the mortal races from evil. They can choose to lay that burden down, so there are Spartoi who farm or who are merchants. But those are exceedingly rare. Most accept the charge of the gods and take adventuring classes, most commonly Paladin, followed by Ranger, followed by Barbarian, often Zealot. The people of the successor states generally revere and admire Spartoi, and are pleased to see them. Before we get to the Koboloi, I'm going to take a minute to talk about plain touch characters in Rega. They don't have separate societies or races or any of that. And they aren't all blah crossed with human. Any of the species of Rega can be descended from gods, elementals, fiends, celestials, etc. Genasi, Aasimar, Tiefling. These are all templates and modifications to the base races. So you might be, for instance, a city dwarf, Fire Genasi, descended from Ignia. Or a human noble, Tiefling, who sadly has the blood of the snake devils of Interitus in their veins. Most such bloodlines are very well known, at least in the case of Aasimar and Genasi, because folk are justifiably proud to claim descent from the gods and their servants. In the successor states, Tiefling blood is often hidden as best it can be. But in Vizantos, the opposite holds true, and Tieflings are revered, while the others are scorned. I will point out once again that none of these are inherently good or evil, but it is hard to shake the reputation of literally deific or anti-deific bloodlines. If there is bias and racism in Rega, it's there. A bias against those descended from or twisted by the dark gods, not any actual race or ethnicity. It still isn't fair, and the gods do try to discourage it. The reverse, again, applies in Vizantos, a bias against those beings favored by the bright gods. And now, the Koboloi, the Goblin folk. They aren't species, really, although they do breed true. What they are is an ongoing tragedy. Members of the other races, intentionally twisted in form and function by the Dark Three, using the mutative blood of Invidia. First amongst them come the Serpent Folk, whom we discussed when we spoke of the elves, former protectors of the swamp. One of the saddest stories of this evil-plagued world. But the others are not much better, if at all. The goblins are halflings taken from all the other lineages and warped via magic, torture, and the blood of Invidia into similar subtypes of goblin. Subterranean, woodland, hill, city. They plague all terrains, usually inverting the halfling virtues and abilities, bringing fear, despair, and ill fortune. Twisted in body and mind, still, exceptional goblins reject evil and fight for the good despite being hated, as do each of the following. Hobgoblins. They are the tough and disciplined former dwarves, twisted to the will of Interitus to be his commanders and battlefield engineers. Again, they come in the varieties of their parent race, hill, mountain, deep, and city. They forged the hordes of the Koboloi into an effective fighting force to throw against the servants of the Bright Gods, and all the border races, that the world might be unmade for the love of Invidia, who died, that she might live again. Bugbears are twisted far indeed, Koboloi made into mockeries of themselves, instead of the beautiful and smooth Spartoi. They are ugly and hairy things. One can be beautiful and hairy, these are not. Their instinct to protect is twisted to murder, their straightforward honor twisted to stealth and malice. Like the others, they vary, but their subtypes resemble the original much less. Aquatic bugbears, wet-furred, scaled, and slimy, strike from ambush at the water's edge, colored like the verdigris of tarnish on bronze. Desert bugbears lurch from below the sands, dulled brass fur and skin shedding dust like rain. Mountain bugbears with their gray, stony growths amongst charcoal fur, leaping down the mountainside. Hill bugbears, with green fur like a fungal growth over copper skins, lurching from the underground or undergrowth, or standing from their hidden blinds. Rage drives them. There are many other creatures twisted by the blood of Invidia, but the last of the true Koboloi are the most insidious. Twisted from humanity, they do not show a single mark of their corruption outwardly, and unlike the Serpent Folk, it's not magic that hides it. Instead, these Plague-born, as they're called, bear their deviance on the inside, both in terms of their evil and in terms of their adapted biology. The Plague-born were modified more carefully, more scientifically, at the behest of Metus, and it shows. Even if one of them were to turn against the dark, they still cannot help but carry and foster disease and terror everywhere they go. So, what few good folk of this kind exist live as hermits, far from anyone they might accidentally harm. Those that choose to serve Metis, of course, go happily into the human cities, and very many live among them. Necromancy is their most common calling. Finally, we come to the dragon spawn. We already know by this point that the true chromatic dragons were crafted from the corpse of Invidia by the Dark Three, and the metallics crafted by the gods to counter them. But many more varieties have risen, as they are the most mutative of the Invidian creatures, those that have the most Invidian blood. Their blood, indeed, causes others to mutate, often toward a draconic form. Some say the lizard folk began this way, though those are usually neutral in the great conflicts. But the kobolds and the chromatic dragonborn, it's important to note that there are no metallic dragonborn in this setting, are literally the spawn of the dragons themselves, born from unfertilized eggs laid by the dragon queens. You can see my article, An Alternative Ecology of Dragons, linked in the description, for a clearer explanation of the process. At their base, Dragonborn and Kobolds are servitor races to the chromatic dragons, though as free-willed creatures, some rebel, and some are even heroic, though they do face great suspicion and discrimination in the successor states at least, due to the actions of their still-serving kin. I hope this has been enlightening and interesting, giving you ideas of how I put the races together and how you could figure out the very different ways species form and interact in your own worlds. I think next time I'll address classes, subclasses, and occupations that may be unique to the successor states and how I came to them. Thank you for your attention.